Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Aller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hello, listeners, Buckeye fans. Thanks for joining us on a new edition of the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Bill Rabinowitz. Ohio State is marching through spring football practice, which is been a little more condensed and is in some ways flying by because Ohio State is just past the midpoint of spring practice. It's also the penultimate week of spring practice. We're not too far away from the spring showcase or spring game. But now that they're through the midpoint, I figured Bill and I would talk about maybe some of the things that have sort of caught our attention through this juncture, at least.
Yeah, Ohio State completed their ninth practice today. We're talking Tuesday, April 1st. No fooling. And, we've only seen a couple of segments of practice. We certainly haven't seen any 11-on-11 stuff. They're keeping a pretty tight lip on position battles. I mean, I guess the one that everyone's talking about with good reason is the quarterback battle between Julian Sayin and Lincoln Kienholz and true freshman Tavian St. Clair. I don't think many people think Tavian St. Clair is going to win the job this year. It's a true freshman. That would be a shocker. And I think most people expect Julian Sayin to be the quarterback. He was the number one recruit and the number one prospect in the 2024 recruiting class. I mean, people probably know his story. He went to Alabama. He was actually there for a couple of weeks. Then Nick Saban retired, and he opened his recruitment and came to Ohio State. Great arm, great release, very quick release. I think the biggest question that Ryan Day probably has about him is, can he be the fiery leader that Will Howard was? Will Howard was, he had a good arm, not a great arm, but he was big. He could run. He was charismatic. He was a great leader. Julian Sayin's a kid from California. First of all, he's 4 years younger than Will Howard? I mean, he's, I think 18, 19 years, probably 19 years old. Will Howard was 23. So there's an age difference. And I think that Julian Sayin or any of the quarterbacks has to kind of prove that they can be that leader, not just the guy who makes the passes, throws the passes, but it can be the leader. And there's nothing that says that Julian Sayin can't be that guy. But he is a quieter guy than Will Howard.
I will say Ohio State does have a good track record, Ryan Day especially, with second-year quarterbacks from Southern California.
C.J. Stroud being
that would be the notable name. I mean, and it's worth, I think, thinking back to that point in time in the Ryan Day era, because that was a quarterback competition that is probably the most similar to this one in terms of just who Ohio State is going to have to pick from. If you recall back to 21, they lose Justin Fields. C.J. Stroud is competing with Kyle McCord as a true freshman. Jack Miller is a redshirt freshman. This year's group of quarterback, you have Lincoln Kienholz, who's a redshirt sophomore, but has only been on campus since the summer of 23. So he's not been on campus for really 2 full years yet. Julian Sayin, a redshirt freshman, and Tavian St. Clair, a true freshman. So this kind of harkens back to that time where Ryan Day is going to need one of his younger quarterbacks to develop very quickly, and not only to win the job, but once they do win the job, because you don't have somebody like Will Howard who came to Ohio State last year with 28 starts under his belt at Kansas State.
Yeah, well, whoever starts he'll be a first-time starter. Lincoln Kienholz played in the Cotton Bowl game against Missouri a couple years ago. Did not go well, as we all remember. And it wasn't really his fault. He had really no business playing in that game. He was a true freshman, hadn't participated in spring practice his freshman year, came from South Dakota. I mean, this was a completely different. He was thrown into the deep end, as they say, and the offensive line struggled in that game. So you don't want to make too many judgments about Lincoln Kienholz based on that game. But it is worth noting that last year, Will Howard was obviously the starter, and Devin Brown was the backup now at Cal. And it was Julian Sayin who was the third stringer, ahead of Lincoln Kienholz. So even in his first year, he was ahead of Kienholz. So I would expect Julian Sayin to be the starter. I am not saying it's a sure thing, because there's a reason that they're competing right now. But Sayin's got a special talent with that throwing arm. And so Keynotes will have to really, really be impressive, or Julian Sayin will have to struggle.
This is a competition I don't think is going to have a lot of definitive answers or
You know, no.
even much of a pecking order in spring practice. They have since last season went on so long and they didn't end up finishing their season until the end of January. They've kind of downplayed the urgency of spring practice in some ways in terms of maybe the workload and management for some guys, and this is much more of a developmental stretch. That feels especially true for the quarterback position with such a young group of guys that they need to bring along. And you look at past competitions, this has not been something that's historically been settled until 2 weeks or so before the season opener. And that is sort of the expectation, I think, for how this one plays out.
And the other factor is the transfer portal. I mean, it doesn't really make sense for Ryan Day to announce a starting quarterback because whoever's not, especially if it's, let's say, Lincoln Keenholz, he's probably going to enter the portal. So you certainly want to prolong this. I don't want to say selfishly, because I don't think there is a clear guy at this point. So he's not being cynical or deceptive. I think it's the reality. But if there's any reason to not say it, then that's the reason. You don't want to. You want to give these guys hope. You want Lincoln Keenholz to come to summer camp, training camp, or Julian Sayin for that matter, thinking they've got a chance to be the quarterback. I mean, that's just self-preservation.
It's hard to imagine that you would ever have a situation again like in 2018 where Dwayne Haskins was in some ways anointed as the clear front runner after spring practice, allowing Joe Burrow to then transfer to LSU as a grad transfer. And that was probably a unique case where you had Burrow with 2 years of eligibility left, so he had an expiring clock in terms of his eligibility. I don't know if that situation would play out again. It hasn't really happened at Ohio State since Day has taken over for Urban.
Yeah, again, we have not seen any real action from these quarterbacks. We can't sit here and say.
Saturday, though. Will Saturday.
Well, Saturday is going to be an open practice, and we'll have a better idea after Saturday. But we've just seen glimpses, and we haven't seen any 11-on-11 stuff. And so we only go by what people are saying, and they're not saying a whole lot. Let's talk about some of the other positions because there are some. Look, they lost a ton of people, right? I mean Ohio State lost almost everybody, but the bulk of their starting lineup from last year's championship team. We know there's Jeremiah Smith on offense, and there's Caleb Downs on defense. Those are two wonderful building blocks, but it takes more than that. At running back, I don't think it stretches the imagination to say that we have a fairly good idea that James Peoples and C.J. Donaldson, the transfer from West Virginia, are going to be roughly the equivalent of Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Now, if they're roughly the equivalent in terms of production, Ohio State will be thrilled. But I think it'll be a tandem situation. James Peoples told me, I asked him, he's good with it. He likes that. I think running backs see the value of not getting overworked in college and sharing the load. Neither Quinshon Judkins nor Travion Henderson had more than 17 carries in a game. I'm not sure that Travion had more than like 12 in a game. So, and you saw how fresh they were at the end of the year. They were really good. So I think that's probably the way it's going to shake out. The other name we keep hearing is Bo Jackson, the freshman. If he lives up to his billing, then that's three.
C.J. Donaldson's an interesting addition to that running back room. To me, he arrived at Ohio State weighing more than 240 pounds. So he is a load to bring down. He has since lost nearly 20 pounds. He said earlier this spring that he was weighing 226. So he's a physical runner between the tackles and being a little lighter. I guess he sort of went on the Will Howard kind of Maradi plan when he got to Ohio State for winter workouts, and he's now lighter. He's somebody who also has a background as a high school tight end. West Virginia recruited him as an H-back, and he was always a sort of a complementary piece in their backfield, but he feels like a Big Ten type of running back to me. I think just an interesting kind of piece. Their transfer class it didn't have the names of Caleb Downs or Will Howard or Quinshon Judkins, but they brought in some valuable pieces, several guys who are going to to maybe certainly have a chance to start, if not be a key part of the rotation on both sides of the ball. That includes Max Clare, the tight end from Purdue, caught over 50 balls last year with the Boilermakers.
Yeah, I think Max Clear is probably the headliner among the transfers. I mean, he was in some ways Purdue's passing offense. I mean, Purdue was obviously terrible last year, and in some ways that makes it harder for somebody to shine because Ohio State's safeties told coaches just from film study, watch out for the tight end. I mean, he was the guy that caught their eye, Max Clare. So now that tight end group is pretty deep. Will Kazmarek is back. Jelani Thurman is back. Bennett Christian's back. Max Clare, obviously. I mean, that's a pretty deep unit right now. The other area where there are two key transfers are the offensive line. Ethan Onyanwa. Am I pronouncing that right, Joey? There we go. Thank you. From Rice, starter there. And, people go, oh, he went to Rice. Well, he was really good at Rice. And he's a big guy. He's 6'7", I think, 6'7" or 6'8", 40 pounds or something. I mean, we saw him, and he's a big boy. I mean, I don't want to say DeJuan Jones-ish, but the closest they've had to somebody like that. DeJuan Jones could just block out the sun. Onyanwa is not quite like that, but he's certainly big. And then the transfer from Minnesota, Philip Daniels, is also a tackle. But that offensive line unit, it's going to be a lot of competition. You've really got 4 quasi starters for 3 spots. I'd expect Carson Hinzman to be the center. I expect Tegret Shabola to be the right guard. And then you've got Luke Montgomery and Austin Cerveld, who can play all over the place. They had a lot of success during the postseason run with a rotation system at guard. I would guess that they would continue that in some form, but that'll be curious how that shakes out.
Yeah, I think left guard is where it gets interesting, specifically because you have Luke Montgomery and Austin Cerveld, who both have experience there and were part of the rotation there. We've also in the first week of practice saw Austin Cerveld repping as the first team left tackle, and whether that sticks or not, Ryan Day sort of framed it as getting him experience at tackle. They need somebody to be able to do maybe what Donovan Jackson did last year, because they are a lot deeper in the interior of their offensive line than they are at tackle. So you need some guys who can cross train, play guard, and tackle. I think it's what they're doing for Austin Cerveld. But could he end up making a push to start a left tackle? I don't think it would necessarily happen over Ethan Onyanwa. I think they brought him as a primo left tackle transfer from Rice for a reason, and you factor in the NIL component of all that. You don't typically go out in the portal and bring in somebody with that type of starting experience and not have them start. That would sort of be plans gone awry. But you have your right tackle. You're maybe penciling Philip Daniels to start. You started 4 games at right tackle at Minnesota last year, but he does not have the track record that Onyanwa had at Rice, where Onyanwa was a multi-year starter there, 2 seasons at right tackle, another full season at left tackle. So I think that kind of makes things a little more interesting if Cerveld does feel like a realistic option at either of your tackle spots. But their depth situation is much better on the offensive line now than it was maybe a year ago, and partly because of the injuries last year. The injuries kind of forced some of the younger players in the line, like Montgomery and Cerveld, to grow up faster, and Hinzman as well, because Carson Hinzman was not – he started in 23, but he was not a starter day one last year in 24.
Right, and Ryan Day said yesterday that they're cross-training their linemen to have a primary position and a secondary position. It doesn't apply to everybody. Onyanwa's a tackle. I mean, it's hard for me to picture him playing center. But I think for everyone else, I think the idea is we need you to be at 2 spots. Part of it is the example of what happened last year with Donovan Jackson, and part of it is the roster reduction, the expected roster reduction to 105 players instead of 120. It still sounds like a ton of players. 104, oh my God, you only have 105 players. Well, only 22 can play at a time. But you start getting injuries and position groups can get thinned out pretty quickly. So it makes sense. I think Onyanwa, I would be very surprised if he's not the left tackle. I'm not nearly as sure about Daniels at say right tackle. I mean, I think I could see Tegra Shabola moving there. I could see Saravel moving there. I mean, Saravel was an Iron Buckeye, one of 3 Iron Buckeyes. The others were Jeremiah Smith and was Sonny, right? Sonny was the other one? Sonny Styles, I think. So Saravel getting that, which is for off-season conditioning, that's tells you kind of where he stands right now. So anyway, that's that. I think the wide receiver position is pretty set. I mean, we know it's Jeremiah Smith and Cornell Tate, and Brandon Innes is the clear number 3 guy to kind of take over the Emeka Ibuka role. Bryson Rogers. I mean, they got some other receivers. They've got Mine Graham, 5-star guys. Just it's amazing what they have in that room. So I think the wide receivers are going to be fine. We talked about the tight ends. If we switch to defense, it's a whole new starting defensive front, but it's not like the cupboard's bare. Caden Curry has played a lot. Kenyatta Jackson's played a lot. Those are going to be the defensive ends probably. You've got Edric Houston, who was a 5-star guy last year, will be the 3-technique tackle. And they're looking at Caden McDonald as the nose tackle. He was really good in goal line situations last year. Look, I mean, you can't lose who they lost from that defensive line and not feel it. But I think they feel pretty good about at least the starters and a couple of the backups. But I think they still need to develop depth there, especially inside.
Yeah, that's the issue more so for that group as well. You feel you need to have some options there outside of that first run of guys, and as you said, especially at tackle. So you need somebody like Tywan Malone, who's been with the program now a couple of years as a transfer from Mississippi. The fact that he's been able to dedicate solely on football rather than splitting his time between baseball in the spring, they hope maybe he can kind of step up and become a more valuable part of the rotation. Jason Moore. And then at the ends, you look at somebody like Logan George, who transferred from Idaho State. Larry Johnson mentioned he had been a pleasant surprise this spring. So they don't have somebody like where Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, and you expect them to play nearly all of the snaps. I think they kind of need to be able to rotate early on to get sort of multiple guys a look, but they do have at least a first string group that you at least have seen on the field doing stuff. Caden Curry had a sack in the Rose Bowl against Oregon, so there are some guys like that who have a little bit of a track record, but just not the week in, week out, nearly every down type of defender.
Yeah, I've always really liked Caden Curry. I mean, he's just a guy who makes plays, just makes plays. The special teams, like whenever there was a play to make on special teams, he was the guy. He's just a football player, and so I think he'll be fine. I think Kenyatta Jackson, they've talked about him being a leader of that unit. I think he'll be fine. Edric Houston, as I said, is a 5-star guy, and Caden McDonald. Hey, he was really. They raved about him last year. Remember all the comments we'd hear about Caden McDonald? Well, now it's their chance. I mean, Caden Curry's waited 3 years for this, and you figure they're gonna take advantage of it. It's their last chance.
There's CJ Hicks too, who's
right.
moved from linebacker to defensive end. Probably actually one of the more intriguing spring practice storylines. Nobody's maybe going through quite a position switch to that extent, and it's a pressing time for him. He has 1 year of eligibility left. The former 5-star recruit, top-ranked player in Ohio in the 22 recruiting class. So can he put it all together? And if he does successfully make that transition, what does that look like? Is he a sort of just a novelty piece, a rotational player, or can he actually be a full-fledged defensive end? So that's kind of the interesting part, because they probably will use him in some fashion as a stand-up pass rusher where he almost looks like a linebacker just on the edge of the line of scrimmage, or is he somebody who can put his hand in the dirt and actually be able to play against the run and be a part of that? Because they could use somebody who can do both of those things.
Are you aware that you slowed your voice down so it sounded like you were in slow motion, and then you sped up again and spoke at a normal speed? You aware you did that?
What did you say, Bill?
Speaking of CJ Hicks, I have a tendency to go 78 RPM too much, so I need to slow it down sometimes. But CJ Hicks was part of the 2022 recruiting class. Joe and I, we've talked about this a lot. I can't remember if we talked about it on this podcast or not, but
We can talk about it all year probably.
yeah, we can. That was the number 4 ranked recruiting class in the country, and they've gotten very, very little production from it, at least compared to what you'd think. I mean, Sonny Styles has been by far the best player from that class, and he wasn't even supposed to be in it. He reclassified to join the 22 class instead of the 23 class. You go down the list: C.J. Hicks, Teger Shabola was, he was a starter last year. Devin Brown gone. All 4 receivers they have are gone. They only have 7 guys from that 21 player group that's even on the roster anymore. I mean, guys like Gabe Powers gone, Hero Kanu gone to Texas. So that class, if Ohio State has another great year, either they're going to do it despite kind of a black hole of a class, or those guys will be late bloomers and make their mark finally. But that's going to be that's a storyline for this season. What do they get out of their senior class?
And in a lot of ways, the 21 class was shaped by this new era of college football, especially NIL, because the big reason so many of them stayed for their senior year was the fact that Ohio State was able to raise money through NIL and retain those players on the roster. And that was a big driver of their success last year. Well, the flip side to that is if you were somebody in the 22 class who might ordinarily be in line to move up to the depth chart after a player leaves early for the NFL draft after his junior season, you're blocked. You don't get to the field.
Right.
You don't maybe get a chance to develop or you get a chance to at least maybe make this splash and then become a bigger part of the rotation, become a starter and all of that. So some of those players left, or some of those players haven't had a chance to make a mark yet, or at least a mark as big as they might hope. So that's kind of the other side of the coin with this era of college football a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think about Caden Curry, and he would be certainly forgiven, and it would be certainly understandable if he had said, "I'm going somewhere else." He could have played as a sophomore somewhere, because he showed enough. I remember as a freshman here to think, that guy's a player. Certain guys just catch your eye. He was one of those guys just caught my eye, and so I think that for guys like that, I think it's just a matter of getting the opportunity. For guys like C.J. Hicks, who have been given opportunities, now it's a chance to finally cash in on them. Carson Hinsman started 2 years ago, as you said. Didn't play very well, and some of it was not his fault. They didn't expect Luke Whippler to go to the pros that early, so he got thrown in before he was really ready. And to Carson Hinsman's credit last year, he didn't mope or pout or transfer after he lost his job to Seth McLaughlin. He just kept working and working and working. And then when he had to play, he was ready. And he played very well, first as a guard and then a center. So I think that when we look back at, let's say, a year from now or 9 months from now, and we say, who among this class really did prove to be a pretty good player, I think Carson Hinsman will be in that group. I expect him to have a good year. But, you have 7 guys. I mean, all these guys are gone. So even if all 7 of these guys on the roster cash in, I mean, they really play well, you're dealing with a seven member senior class.
Right, so many of the guys aren't here anymore. None of the receivers are.
None of the receivers are here anymore. Right.
Although I don't think Ohio State should be concerned about its situation.
No. I mean, those guys kind of got caught between the Emeka Bukas of the world and the Jeremiah Smiths of the world, and they weren't going to beat those guys out. Right. I mean, I don't think Brian Hartline has given the 4 guys who left a thought this spring. He's happy with his receivers. I'm just making the point that it's a 7 senior class. That's it. It's just kind of crazy. So,
that Will Smith. What's the one gif where he's in the room and sort of looking around? There's nobody left.
I don't know if you meant Will Smith, the football player, or Will Smith, the actor. Will Smith is the son of Will Smith, the great great Ohio State defensive end. So I don't know if that or the Fresh Prince of Bel Air.
I was going for the Fresh Prince of.
Okay. No, I don't know the GIF. Sorry. Well, maybe our faithful listeners will clue me in.
Yeah, there's a GIF where he's in the room and he's looking around. There's nobody else there, so that's kind of like the 22 class.
Maybe. And we talked today to the cornerbacks and safeties, and I talked with Devin Sanchez. He's the 5-star, number 5 overall prospect in the country last year. A lot, big things were obviously expected of him, but he's probably not going to start this year unless there are injuries, because you have Davis Igbinosun and you have Jermaine Matthews, who I think are in line, or they're going to be the starters. I mean, certainly Davis and Igbinosun, and very, very probably Jermaine Matthews. And you have Aaron Scott, you have other guys, but Devin Sanchez is, he's 6'2", he's rangy, he's got everything you'd like in a corner. It's just, he needs experience.
He's long. Well, I think it's worth keeping this in mind, as well as Ohio State players have mentioned this on a handful of occasions. And with the new defensive coordinator and Matt Patricia, they have talked a little bit about being more versatile, having a variety of different packages. So it wouldn't surprise me if the way they divide reps are, it's not as if somebody gets 100% of Jack Sawyer and JT's reps. It's a little bit of more of a snap share at some spots, and they are a little more versatile with the packages they throw out. I think that could be something to maybe watch out for. We'll see.
And the position group we haven't mentioned really are linebackers, and I don't think there's a lot of uncertainty about that. Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese will be the starters. Assuming Ohio State sticks with a 2 linebacker alignment, and they really like Peyton Pierce too, sophomore. They're very high on him. So I think that those, Sonny Styles is certainly going to be a captain. I would expect him to be the Block O recipient this year. I can't think of anyone else who would be a better choice. I mean, maybe Caleb Downs, but Caleb's only a junior and just got here last year. So I'd be surprised if it's not Sonny Styles. And they've really been impressed with Arvell Reese this year. He played a lot last year. When they used 3 linebackers, he was the 3rd linebacker along with Cody Simon. So I expect him to be really good. But that's just kind of a position with not a lot of drama.
Which is a little bit of a change from a few years ago, where they were using a converted running back to start at linebacker. I mean, that is a position group that has come a long way, I think, in the last few years.
Oh, there's no question. No question. I mean, and Cody Simon emerged as a star last year. We knew he would be a solid player last year, and toward the end of the year, he was phenomenal. I mean, he was really, really good. And so I think Sonny Styles, now it's his 2nd year at linebacker. He switched from safety last year. I expect him to just hit the ground running and be a force. He's big, he's fast, he's strong, smart, instinctive. So, he got burned a few times in coverage, but that's going to happen with the linebacker. But it's, if you have a defense that has Caleb Downs in the back end and Sonny Styles in the middle, you got something going. It's like having Jeremiah Smith on offense. When in doubt, throw the ball to Jeremiah, right? It can be backyard football. So, everyone talks about Ohio State lost. Of course they did. And anyone who expects or demands another national title, I think is probably unrealistic. Now, I certainly think they could win a national title. And in fact, in some betting sites I've seen, they're the favorite. I mean, not an odds-on favorite, but, compared to anyone else. And I can see it, because I don't think there are any great teams right now saying this on April 1st. But look, this is not a natty or bust season like Denzel Burke proclaimed it a year ago. I think people have, understand that this is a young team, not a lot of returning starters, and it could be some bumps in the road.
I think that it's all fair. I don't know what we were going to coin this season. Last season was natty or bust. I don't know if this is quarterfinals or bust.
Look, if they don't, any year that Ohio State doesn't make the playoffs is a failure, right? I mean, that's just
playoff or bust this year.
Yeah, look, and I think a realistic expectation in terms of saying the season's a disappointment is if they don't get to the semifinals. I think anything from then on is like, okay, let's roll the dice and see. Beating Michigan obviously is a priority. Getting to the Big Ten championship and winning it is a priority. That's obviously something last year's team didn't do. So I think if they do that, let's say they beat Michigan and win the Big Ten, I think the season's a success, even if
Oh,
they
yeah.
were to lose in the quarterfinals of the playoffs, depending on how that game went. But because this team can do something that last year's team didn't. That's maybe one that's an incentive for them. But yeah, it's going to be a fun year. Look, it's new guys. It's it's going to be a new quarterback, new running backs, not really new receivers, but a lot of new defensive players, and so that's that'll be refreshing.
It's a year where it's the receivers. It's everybody sort of looking for a way to sort of elevate themselves.
Yeah, yeah. And then the other thing is the pressure's off Ryan Day now. You can feel it. You can see it in the press conferences. I don't say he's a different guy, but he is a much more relaxed coach. He smiles more. He seems much more at ease. I made this comment. I can't remember if it was to you or not. He won the championship when he was 45. When you don't win a championship and you're 45, it feels like time's running out. When you do, it feels like, oh, he's still young, right? 45 years, he's never won a national championship. 46 years, he has won. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it feels like, okay, he's back to being kind of a young coach who's already kind of gotten to the mountaintop. And now I don't say it's gravy, but now it's like, okay, what kind of legacy could you build to become like a legend?
Yeah, it sort of resets your clock a little bit.
Yeah, but think if they hadn't won last year, and then they're starting again with essentially a new team in a lot of ways. Like, is this guy ever going to win one? He blew it last year, didn't win it last year. It's going to be another cycle before he gets a team good enough, as good as last year's. Well, he won it, and so I mean, do you agree that he just feels like a different person in terms of just
more relaxed.
looseness?
Certainly a little looser. I don't think there's any question on that front.
Right. So, okay, I think have we pretty much covered it, Joey?
We've covered our bases, and we should have some more observations for you all after we get to see them live and in color Saturday for Student Appreciation Day. We'll see how much we'll see who's involved in that scrimmage too. Something to keep in mind too is would not be surprised if they have some veterans who are held out of that, but certainly should be a good look at the quarterbacks and the state of that competition between those three scholarship guys. Thanks for joining us on this latest edition of the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast. Be sure to visit dispatch.com/sports for all the latest surrounding Ohio State football. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.